There's a house on a Kyoto side street, so narrow that two people can't pass without turning sideways. Everyone who steps through its door says the same thing before they've even sat down. This feels bigger than my own home. It isn't. It's smaller. My friend Aiko lives there, and over the next 20 minutes, I'm giving you all 15 decisions inside her house responsible for that feeling, starting with the first one, right now, before you've even taken off your shoes. Idea number 1 is the first thing you don't see when you walk in. No shoes scattered across the floor, no sneakers kicked off sideways, no sandals nobody quite remembers to line up. Instead, a slim cabinet built straight up the wall, a getabako, holding every pair stacked vertically instead of sprawled sideways across the ground. The same 8 or 10 pairs of shoes that used to cover several square feet of visible floor now occupy none of it. And the floor itself becomes something you can actually see the far edge of. Idea 2, right beside it. Hooks that fold flat against the wall the instant nothing's hanging on them. A bag goes up, the hook holds it. Take the bag down, the hook lies flush again, so the entryway isn't permanently wearing a row of hardware, it only actually needs half the time. And idea 3 sits on a small shelf by the door. One shallow basket, and pointedly, nothing else near it. Keys go in the basket. Mail goes in the basket. Everything that would otherwise slowly colonize that surface, the loose receipts, the stray coins, the things nobody quite knows where else to put, has exactly one place it's allowed to live, and nowhere else it's allowed to spread to. Architects and environmental psychologists have a name for what all 3 of these are doing at once: protecting the sightline. A room feels large based on how far your eye can travel before hitting an obstruction, not on its actual square footage. Clear the floor at shoe height, right where your eye naturally drops the moment you walk through a door, and the whole entryway reads as larger to the brain, even though not a single wall has physically moved. Aiko says she didn't design any of this from scratch. She grew up in a house with a genkin exactly like this one, and never thought about it twice until she moved out at 18 into an apartment that didn't have one. Just a front door that opened straight onto carpet, no threshold, no ritual, nowhere for shoes to go but wherever they landed. It took her less than a month to notice how different walking in felt. Not worse, exactly, just less like arriving somewhere and more like simply stopping. Into the kitchen, where the ideas start arriving faster, because a kitchen simply has more surfaces competing for the same limited attention. Idea 4, a narrow vertical dish rack instead of the wide, flat kind most kitchens default to, taking a fraction of the counter a horizontal one usually claims. Idea 5, matching square containers, corners flush against corners, stacked 3 high with no wasted gaps between them, instead of the mismatched collection of round containers most kitchens quietly accumulate over years, each one wasting the curved space around its own body. Idea 6, a magnetic knife strip mounted right on the wall above the counter, freeing an entire drawer that used to hold nothing else but them. Cognitive psychologists call this chunking, the brain's tendency to process a group of identical, aligned objects as one single unit, instead of registering each one separately. A cabinet of matching containers doesn't just look neater than a jumble of mismatched ones sitting beside it. It's measurably faster for your visual system to take in at a glance. Aiko's kitchen isn't emptier than most kitchens people cook in daily. It's simply organized in a way that costs your attention less every time you look at it. She mentions, almost as an aside, that she used to own nearly triple the containers she owns now. A drawer full of them, collected one at a time over years, no 2 quite the same shape. She didn't throw most of them away in one dramatic afternoon. She simply stopped replacing the odd ones as they wore out and let the matching set grow on its own, one purchase at a time. Until one day, the drawer just happened to be uniform. The closet is where guests stop asking politely and start quietly taking photos on their phones. Idea 7. A second hanging rod, installed roughly a foot below the first, doubling vertical hanging space in the exact same footprint. A closet that used to hold one season of clothes now holds two, without growing by a single inch. Idea 8. Vacuum-sealed bags, flattening out-of-season clothing and spare bedding down to a fraction of their folded size, released again in a few minutes with nothing more than a hand pump when the season actually changes. Idea 9. A removable shelf built into the closet wall, splitting one deep, awkward cavity into two clean, stackable levels. Just enough room for a folded futon to sit without slowly collapsing under its own weight onto whatever's stored beneath it. Psychologist Jonathan Levov's well-known research on decision fatigue found that even small, low-stakes choices, repeated often enough across a day, measurably wear down our capacity to choose well later on. A closet where nothing quite fits forces a tiny decision every single morning. Squeeze it in, leave it out, deal with it later, again. A closet engineered so everything genuinely has room removes that decision completely before 8 a.m. has even properly started. Aiko says the real test wasn't the closet itself. It was the first time she packed for a trip after installing the second rod and the compression bags. What used to take her 20 minutes of pulling things out to find room for a suitcase took under 5, because for the first time, everything she owned already had a place that wasn't touching anything else. Nothing had to be moved out of the way before something else could be moved into it. The sitting room turns out not to be a single-purpose room at all. Idea 10. A low chabudai table folded flat against the wall until dinner, then unfolded to the exact center of the floor and folded away again the moment the plates are cleared and washed. Idea 11. A sliding fusuma door in place of a hinged one, reclaiming the entire quarter circle of floor. A swinging door would otherwise permanently demand and deny to everything else sharing that room. Idea 12. What looks, at first glance, like an ordinary storage bench, until Aiko lifts the lid to reveal blankets, spare cushions, and an entire winter's worth of bedding folded neatly inside, doing double duty as both seating and storage in the same single square foot of floor. Watch this room change over one evening and the effect stops being theoretical. At 6, it's a sitting room, bench along the wall, floor otherwise bare and quiet. By 7, the chabudai is out and it's a dining room. Plates set directly on the low table the way they have been in homes like this for generations, steam rising off 2 bowls of rice in a room that an hour earlier held no table at all. By 9, the table has folded flat and vanished again, cushions pulled from the bench, and it's simply a room to sit and talk in, empty in the exact places it needs to be empty. Nothing was carried in from elsewhere in the house for any of it. The room already contained everything it needed. It just wasn't showing all of it at once. The visitor watches this happen in real time over the course of the evening and says, more to herself than to Aiko, that her own dining table has sat in the same spot, doing nothing, for roughly 22 hours of every single day since she bought it. 3 ideas left, and Aiko saves the bathroom for last, because she says it's the room people give up on organizing fastest. Too wet, too small, too easy to just let things pile on the edge of the tub and call it done. Idea 13. A magnetic shower caddy mounted straight to the tile, holding bottles upright with no shelf sagging under their weight. No suction cups slowly losing their grip. Nothing propped in a corner where it doesn't actually belong. Idea 14. A tension rod installed high across the bathtub that folds down only when something needs to hang and dry. A swimsuit, a hand towel, a delicate item that can't go in the dryer, and disappears flush against the wall the rest of the time, never once in the way of an actual shower. Idea 15. A slim rack that sits directly over the toilet tank, turning the single most wasted vertical foot in most bathrooms into real shelving for towels and spare supplies that would otherwise be stuffed under the sink, behind the pipes, in the one drawer nobody can ever quite close all the way. Psychologist James Gibson's concept of affordance describes how an object's own design silently tells you what to do with it before you've consciously thought about it at all. A caddy mounted at exactly arm height doesn't just hold shampoo. It tells your hand where to reach every single morning without you ever having to decide. Before the caddy, Aiko says her bathroom looked like most bathrooms do, 4 or 5 bottles balanced along the edge of the tub, one of them always tipping over the moment the water pressure changed. None of them actually chosen for that spot, just left there because the edge of a tub is where bottles end up, if nobody decides otherwise. The caddy didn't just move them off the floor, it made the decision once, permanently, so it never had to be made again on a rushed morning with the shower already running. There's a word for what all 15 of these ideas are quietly doing together, and it happens to be one of the oldest concepts in Japanese design, ma. It doesn't translate cleanly into English, but the closest approximation is meaningful empty space. Not absence, not a void, not a room simply missing furniture, but space that's been deliberately left open because whatever surrounds it matters more when it isn't crowded up against something else. A folded table isn't just a table put away out of sight. It's an hour of floor, reclaimed and handed back to the room as ma. A sliding door isn't just a door. It's a quarter circle of ma, a hinged door would have permanently claimed for itself, whether anyone was using it or not. None of these 15 ideas required Aiko's house to be built differently or to be a single square foot bigger than it already was when she moved in. Every one of them is a small, deliberate decision about where an object lives at the exact moment it isn't being used, made instead of the far easier, far more common decision almost every home defaults to without ever quite choosing it, simply leaving things wherever they happen to land. It's worth sitting with how differently that reframes a small home. Most advice about limited space treats the walls as the problem to solve around. Squeeze the furniture in, shrink the footprint, apologize for what doesn't fit. Ma starts from the opposite direction entirely. The walls were never the problem. The problem was always the objects that had quietly claimed permanent residence in the space between them, whether or not they were doing anything useful there at the time. Move the object, even temporarily, and the space it was standing in doesn't vanish. It simply becomes available again for whatever the next hour actually needs it for. Nobody who visits Aiko's house ever measures it. Nobody asks the square footage or compares it to their own floor plan or does the math on who technically has more room. They just notice, within the first 10 minutes, that something about it breathes differently than their own home does. And most of them leave without ever quite being able to say why, because the 15 decisions responsible for it are small enough individually to walk right past without seeing. Here's what that means tonight. Not all 15. Trying all of them at once is exactly the kind of decision fatigue this whole video has been describing. Pick one from each of the 5 rooms we just walked through together and let the rest wait. In your entryway, find one thing currently living on the floor that could live vertically instead, even on a single cheap shelf bought this week. In your kitchen, swap in just a few matching containers and let the rest follow gradually instead of all at once, the same way Aiko's own drawer filled in over time. In your closet, add 1 second rod or 1 set of compression bags and give one section its room back to breathe. In your living space, find the one piece of furniture you use for the fewest hours out of your day and ask honestly what it would take to fold it, slide it, or tuck it away the moment its job is finished. And in your bathroom, get one single bottle up off the floor of the shower and onto the wall where your hand already expects to find it without looking. 5 small decisions. None of them expensive, none of them requiring a wall to move. Aiko's own 15 didn't arrive in a single weekend either. They came one at a time, over 8 months. Each one added only once the last had already become a habit she no longer had to think about. There's no version of this where you wake up tomorrow to a finished house. There's only a version where, a year from now, you've quietly made 15 decisions of your own and can't quite remember when most of them happened. Before her last guest left that night, she asked Aiko the obvious question, the one that had been sitting in the back of her mind since the kitchen. Doesn't it ever feel like you're constantly putting things away over and over all day long? Aiko shook her head, already halfway to the door to see her out. I already decided where they live before I ever moved in, she said. I'm not putting anything away. I'm just returning it. It's a different feeling once you notice the difference. Heavier when a thing has to be dealt with. Almost weightless when it simply has a place it already belongs. The visitor thought about that the whole train ride home, past streets that all, from the outside, still looked exactly as narrow as they had that morning. If you know someone whose home is bigger than Aiko's and somehow still manages to feel more crowded, send them this. They'll understand immediately and completely why you thought of them. This has been a look at the design thinking behind small Japanese homes, offered as a perspective worth borrowing from, not a prescription to follow exactly. You don't need a Machiya townhouse or a street too narrow to pass on to use any of this. You just need one wall, one shelf, and one decision you're willing to make before tomorrow morning. I'll see you in the next one.